My name is Iris Vallon, 24 years old. Caldwell's office always smelled like lemon oil and old arguments. The mahogany paneling caught the winter light in polished ribs, and every person in black sat in it like a reflection of themselves. My Uncle Gregory kept checking his phone, the sly, boat-browsing posture he thought no one noticed. My Aunt Vivian had the brittle smile of a woman who'd already picked cabinet finishes in her head. My mother, Patricia, smoothed the hem of her dress as if wrinkles were a moral failing. The rest of the constellation, cousins, in-laws, the caretaker, had arranged their faces for grief and their souls for accounting. I took the back corner, same as always, the seat for someone who knows the exits. I was the only grandchild who'd bothered to visit every week for the last 5 years, to bring sherbet and silly movies, and to count pills because sometimes love is pill counting. The others came at Thanksgiving and Christmas with wine labels Grandma didn't care about and laughter that was just good manners. They hugged like contracts. Attorney Caldwell cleared his throat, and even the chandelier seemed to listen. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Eleanor Vallon," he said, his tone both eulogy and drumroll. Mrs. Vallon was evaluated 2 months prior to her passing and found to be of sound mind and testamentary capacity. I saw Gregory's mouth tighten, the first hairline crack. He started with the bequests that were technically kind but functionally cruel. To my daughter Patricia, I leave my collection of china plates, as she always admired them during her brief visits. The word brief hit like a gavel. My mother's face tried to smile and failed. To my son Gregory, I leave my gardening tools, since he frequently remarked on how beautiful my yard looked. He had, usually while calculating the lot's resale value. To my daughter-in-law Vivian, my recipe books, which she often complimented but never used. Vivian's jaw flickered. A cousin got bookends, another a lamp. The radius widened to petty, a stapler, a doormat, a half-empty bottle of perfume. Keepsakes that understood the people better than the people understood themselves. Then Caldwell's cadence altered. He adjusted his glasses and watched for impact. The remainder of my estate, properties, investments, bank accounts, and personal assets, totaling approximately $3.7 million, I leave entirely to my granddaughter, Iris Vallon, with one condition. The room rotated toward me, as if pulled by a tide. My throat tightened with the citrus-sharp smell of polish and panic. Caldwell slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. The condition is as follows. Before accepting the inheritance, Iris must read aloud the letters enclosed, one to each family member. These letters contain information Mrs. Vallon gathered over the past 5 years about how each of you truly feel about her and one another. The letters must be read within the next 10 minutes. If not, the entire estate passes to charity. "Absolutely not," my mother snapped, rising so fast her chair squealed. She was senile. "Mrs. Patterson," Caldwell said, calm as granite, "your mother was medically evaluated. The will is ironclad." "What kind of sick game is this?" Gregory muttered, color rising. "You can't—" "The choice is yours," Caldwell said, and tapped the envelope once, evenly. "Proceed or forfeit." In the envelope, the letters wore their names like verdicts. The topmost, Gregory in Grandma's looping hand. The paper trembled in my fingers. Sunday dinners flashed behind my eyes. Gregory's low conspiratorial voice in the kitchen, the way he talked about my father, his brother, as if absence were a personal failing and not a wound. I broke the seal. "Gregory, I know what you did to your brother." The room stopped. Even the HVACs paused. "I know about the business loan you forged in his name. I know about the investment fund you emptied. I know he didn't abandon his family. You drove him away, stealing everything he built, then convincing everyone he chose to disappear." Vivian whispered, "Greg?" as if the syllable could be unspoken. My mother blanched. Gregory's eyes went wide, then narrow, the hinge from shock to denial. "That's a lie," he said, lurching up. Caldwell stepped between us, with a stillness that said he'd planned for lurches. "Mr. Patterson, sit down, or I'll have security remove you." I read on, voice thinner now, as if words were blades that cut their speaker too. "You filed false police reports. You hired someone to threaten him. You told him if he came back, you'd frame his daughter." The daughter thrummed in my ears like a second pulse. "The company you claimed went bankrupt. You dissolved it, moved the assets to a new LLC under Vivian's maiden name, and ran it successfully for 15 years. The beach house was purchased with stolen money. Vivian's chair scraped back hard enough to bite the floor. "We should," she said to no one. "Sit," Caldwell said without raising his voice. "We're not finished." I looked at Gregory. The rage had drained from his face. What remained was something uglier: calculation. "You can't," he started. I reached for the next envelope with hands that weren't fully mine, as if Grandma had borrowed them. Patricia. My mother's name looked too soft to hold what it must. The clock on Caldwell's credenza clicked like a metronome for panic. "Patricia, you knew." My mother shook her head before I finished the sentence. No, I didn't. You discovered the forged documents 3 months after your husband disappeared. You confronted Gregory. He promised you a share if you kept silent. You accepted $3,000 a month for 15 years. The room tilted. The china plates in my mind shattered. "I had to survive," she whispered, as if we were alone. "You had a husband who loved you," I said, my voice coming from far away. "You sold him out." Iris, her hand lifted, palm open, and fell. Caldwell checked the clock. 8 minutes. The next envelope felt heavier. Diana. My cousin looked bored until she didn't. "Diana, you've been stealing from your parents' retirement fund for 6 years. Since being named trustee at 21, you siphoned more than $200,000 for trips and designer clothes." "It was just sitting there," she snapped, a too-quick confession masquerading as defense. "I was going to put it back." "When?" I asked. "After they had nothing left for retirement?" Her mother turned toward her like discovering a stranger in her house. Caldwell's clock ticked louder, or maybe my heart did. The envelope addressed. Vivian stared up at me like an old photograph. I slid my thumb under the glue. "Vivian, you've been having an affair with Richard, your husband's business partner, for 3 years. The baby you miscarried last year wasn't Gregory's. When you learned it was Richard's, you terminated the pregnancy and told your husband it was a miscarriage." The chair clattered backward. Vivian's mouth opened and closed around gases of explanation. Gregory looked like a man learning the ground was optional. "How could she possibly—" Vivian began. "Medical records," Caldwell said quietly. "Phone logs, financials." Mrs. Vallon was thorough. The air thinned. I didn't trust my knees. In the corner, Denise, Grandma's last-year caretaker, watched the proceedings with the flat effect of someone planning a later story where none of this happened to her. Caldwell's eyes landed on me. 6 minutes, he said, as if time itself were a condition Grandma had set. I reached for the next letter and glanced at the door. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass, and for a beat I thought I saw the outline of a badge. The rumor about police in the next room wasn't rumor. It was choreography. I broke the seal. The paper rasped like a match. The words on the page were a fuse. And then Gregory lunged again. One last stupid arc of fury against the inevitable. He almost reached me before Caldwell's hand found his shoulder and pressed him back into a chair that suddenly remembered it was furniture in a courtroom. "Read," my uncle spat, breath hot with panic. "Or refuse the money. Either way, get it over with." I looked down at the envelope on top of the stack, the one bearing my mother's sister's name, the next theater fire waiting to leap. I looked up at my mother, at the woman who'd taught me to double knot laces and, apparently, to price silence. She held my gaze and then looked away. I slid a finger under the flap. 5 minutes, Caldwell said gently. I understood then. This wasn't a will. It was a detonator. Grandma hadn't left me money. She'd left me a choice, truth or comfort. With a clock to make sure I didn't mistake hesitation for mercy. I inhaled, tasted lemon oil and ash, and read the next name aloud. Helen, I read, the paper cool against my fingers, though my palms were sweat-slick. The chandelier hummed like a trapped fly. You've been embezzling from the foundation you run, the one meant for sick children. You skimmed donations, falsified records, and diverted over $150,000 last year alone to offshore accounts. Across from me, my mother's sister stared at her hands the way a child stares at a broken toy, hoping it might fix itself if she looked hard enough. No denial, no outrage, just the slow collapse of a person who finally believes in gravity. I had debt, she whispered, the words falling like loose buttons. I made bad investments. It got away from me. You didn't lose control, I said before I could stop myself. You took it, from children who didn't have time for your mistakes. Beside her, my Aunt Vivian exhaled a laugh that wasn't laughter. We're all criminals now, she murmured, and Gregory flinched, like she'd slapped him. Caldwell checked the antique clock, its second hand clicking a bright, indifferent rhythm. 4 minutes, he said, and it felt obscene. Time taking inventory of us while we took inventory of our sins. I reached for the next envelope. Brandon. My youngest cousin had been fidgeting since the reading began, his leg bouncing so hard the chair whispered across the rug. He was a freshman in college who still said bro like punctuation. Brandon, I read, you've been dealing drugs from your dorm. Not just using, selling. You built a distribution network across 3 colleges. The car your parents believe they bought you, you paid for it with drug money. He half rose, his hoodie rustling. No, I'm not. The denial died under Caldwell's voice. There are 2 officers in the next room, the attorney said, gentler than you'd expect from a man with a wall of leather-bound consequences behind him. Your grandmother provided evidence. Whether they file charges may depend on what happens here. Brandon's mouth worked. He sat. Next, Trevor, Gregory's son, the smug gravity well at every holiday, his jokes always one step to the left of kind. He had been leaning back like this was performance art, and he, the critic. Trevor, I read, you've been installing spyware on coworkers' computers, gathering compromising information and blackmailing them. At least 4 careers and marriages ruined. He smirked, then remembered smirking was for people with leverage. Can't prove anything. Your grandmother could, Caldwell said evenly. She retained a forensic specialist. Every keystroke is archived. Trevor's face flickered, surprise, then calculation, then something like awe for a woman who'd been underestimated for too long. We all had, I thought. That was part of the cruelty. We'd forced Grandma to become an investigator in her last years on Earth. The envelope with Denise on it weighed like a stone. I had liked Denise at first. The gentle voice, the tidy pill case, the way she tucked blankets around Grandma's knees as if caring were mostly tucking. Toward the end, Grandma had seemed foggy, slower, as if days fell through her fingers. We'd blamed age because blame is easier when it doesn't have a face. My voice went small. Denise, you were slowly poisoning me. Not enough to kill me quickly, enough to make me appear increasingly senile. You wanted me declared incompetent so you could control my medical decisions and finances. A crisp inhale from the corner. The caretaker stood, hands flat on the back of her chair. That woman was dying anyway, she said, and anyway landed like arsenic in water, diluted, invisible, fatal. Caldwell didn't look at her. He looked at me. Mrs. Valen's arsenic levels normalized after Denise's termination 6 months ago, he said for the record. Medical records and lab tests confirm. Denise's mouth hardened into a hinge. The door's frosted glass blurred 2 shapes, waiting. My stomach flipped. Somewhere, a part of me still wanted to call time out and pass out sherbet and revive Sunday movies and pretend this was a theatrical version of our family that would end at the curtain. But rehearsals had been real, and the props were evidence. The stack in my hands was thinner, a few letters left, and beneath them a smaller envelope, stiff and cream-colored, my name in Grandma's looped handwriting that always looked like music notes trying to apologize. I slid it to the bottom of the pile as if I could push fate down a page. 3 minutes, Caldwell said. His voice had the quality of church bells at midday. None of this was his, and he rang anyway. I pulled Vivian's letter again to be sure I had read the most brutal part, but there was a postscript I had missed. Grandma's handwriting smaller, sharper. Richard transferred funds from the company to a private account labeled consulting. The same week you booked a cottage at the beach house. Statements enclosed. The house bought with stolen money had sheltered stolen intimacy. It felt like the universe playing fair in the worst possible way. Keep going, Gregory said, hoarse. Maybe he thought the game was to get it all out before the buzzer to win something back. I found the letter with Diana's name again. It rattled against my fingers like a warning, but we had already crossed that bridge and burned it. Next, Caldwell prompted. There were 2 envelopes left addressed to people who hadn't yet been pierced. One had Vivian's son's name, Trevor, already torn open, which meant the last addressed accusation was exhausted, and all that remained was the smallest envelope, the one that had been waiting for me since the first knock of lemon oil and grief. I paused. Everyone leaned in like I was something on a cutting board. 2 minutes, Caldwell said softly, because mercy in his mouth sounded like a countdown too. I slipped my finger beneath the wax. The seal cracked like ice. Inside, a single page folded in thirds, the edges worn where someone had handled it too often. My darling girl, the first line read, in Grandma's hand, and the room blurred at the edges. I swallowed. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. My father's ghost, and the cost of it, and the blessing disguised as a bomb. I'll read this last, I said, and slid my letter back into the envelope like a prayer deferred. You're required to read each letter aloud before accepting the inheritance, Caldwell said, eyes steady. He didn't add, but the clock did. Charity waits to collect the pieces if you falter. I will, I said. Just last. My mother's voice cut through, raw. Iris, please. Please what? The question startled me with its own sharpness. Please pretend? Please save you from words you made true? Her mouth closed. The room listened to a second-hand finish a lap. I drew a breath that scraped my ribs on the way in. Grandma, I hope you forgive me if I do this without elegance, I thought, and then said aloud. The letters to Gregory, Patricia, Diana, Vivian, Brandon, Trevor, and Helen have been read into record. The letter to Denise has been read. I held up the last envelope, the one with my name. This one is mine. From the other side of the frosted door came a soft knock. Caldwell didn't turn. 90 seconds, he said, and gave me a tiny nod as if agreeing with a choice I hadn't made yet. I broke the seal. My darling girl, I read, and my voice cracked on girl like a bridge too old for trucks. If you're reading this, you've learned hard truths. You're wondering why I asked you to do this. Because the house had to be cleared before we could open the windows. Gregory laughed once, a sound made of teeth. I couldn't leave money to a nest of cruelty and crime. You were the only one who came because you loved me, not what I owned. But there's more. My hands trembled. The words moved. Your father is alive. He's been living under an assumed name in Colorado for 15 years. I found him 2 years ago. He wanted to reach out, but he was afraid. Of your uncle finding him, of hurting you, of being hated for leaving when he was driven out. He never stopped loving you. The room went very quiet. Even grief held its breath. His number and address are enclosed. The choice to contact him is yours. No pressure, only truth. As for the others, the evidence is enough to prosecute, or you can let them live with the knowing. Either way, the estate is yours. Use it well. Be better. I love you. I stopped. For a heartbeat, the office ceased to be a place. It became a world split open along the grain. My mother's hand found her throat. Gregory whispered something that sounded like no, and of course at the same time. On the other side of the door, the shadows shifted. The knob moved an inch, then settled, waiting. Caldwell set his pen down. 30 seconds. I looked at the page again, pretending I could read it without tearing it, pretending I could breathe around a new geography. My father out there, not a grave, but a telephone number. Not abandonment, but exile, enforced by the man sitting 6 feet away from me, and a woman who had called it survival. I folded the letter carefully, as if breaking it would break the miracle inside. I've read it, I said. All of them. Caldwell nodded once, solemn. Somewhere, a switch flipped. The hidden choreography of a will that was also a trapdoor and a rescue rope. From the hall, a woman's voice, firm, almost kind. On your count, counselor. Caldwell looked at the clock. The second hand clicked into place like a key turning. Now, he said. The door opened. The moment the door opened, the air changed. Not colder, not louder, just heavier, as if the room had been holding its breath for too long and now didn't know what to do with oxygen. 2 officers stepped inside first, their shoes soundless on the carpet. Behind them came a woman in a navy suit with sharp eyes and a folder under her arm. She moved like she already knew every truth in the room. Detective Morrison, she said, flashing her badge toward Caldwell. We've been waiting for confirmation. Mrs. Valen's instructions were very specific. Gregory lurched to his feet. You can't just barge in here. This is a private... Will reading, Morrison finished. Yes. Which your mother conditioned on the release of several evidence packages she gave us 6 months ago. She held up the folder. We have enough here to make it public. For the first time, Gregory looked small. His bluster melted into something hollow. The edges of a man who had finally run out of versions of himself to perform. Caldwell turned to me. Ms. Valen, per the instructions in your grandmother's will, the decision is yours. She left it in your hands. What decision? I asked, though I already knew. Whether to let them walk out of here or to move forward with the arrests. Every pair of eyes in that room turned toward me. My mother's were red, watery, pleading. Iris, she whispered, voice trembling. Please, we can fix this as a family. You don't have to destroy us. I thought of Grandma's letter, the steady handwriting, the final line. The house had to be cleared before we could open the windows. I looked at my mother. I'm not the one who destroyed us, I said quietly. You just hid the wreckage. Caldwell's tone was calm, procedural. Your grandmother documented everything. Bank accounts, forged contracts, surveillance recordings. She even left notarized affidavits from witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak during her lifetime. Gregory's voice cracked. You can't believe all that. She was bitter, senile. Morrison set the folder on Caldwell's desk and opened it with a slow, deliberate motion. Inside were labeled dividers, each with a name written across the tab. Gregory, Patricia, Helen, Trevor, Brandon, Vivian, Diana, Denise. Funny, Morrison said. Most senile people don't gather notarized statements, chain of custody logs, and forensic reports. She nodded to the officers. Begin. The officers moved in sync, almost graceful. Cuffs glinted against mahogany and black silk. Vivian gasped when cold metal touched her wrist. Brandon muttered something about calling a lawyer. Trevor didn't say a word, just stared at the carpet as if it might open up and swallow him. When one of the officers reached Gregory, he jerked back. Don't touch me. I'll ruin all of you. Morrison's tone didn't waver. You already did. He lunged toward me again. Foolish, desperate. But this time the officer beside him caught his arm, twisting it behind his back. The sound that left his throat was half snarl, half cry. You destroyed this family, he spat, veins bulging in his neck. No, I said, steady now. Grandma just made sure everyone finally saw what it looked like. As they led him toward the door, my mother stood abruptly. Wait, she cried, stumbling forward. Please, Gregory, say something. Tell them it's a mistake. He turned to her, cuffed hands trembling. You knew, he said flatly. You've known for 15 years. Don't pretend you didn't take your cut. She went still. The silence after his words was so deep it sounded like snowfall. Detective Morrison gave a small nod. Patricia Vallon, you're not under arrest at this time, but we'll need to take your statement. My mother blinked. Statement? You were an accessory. Whether it was fear or greed, the law doesn't really distinguish once you start cashing checks. Her knees buckled slightly, and she sank into her chair, whispering my name as if it could still save her. But I didn't move. Morrison looked at me once more, her voice softer now. Your grandmother trusted you to decide. Do you want to press full charges? I thought of Grandma at her kitchen table, sunlight on her silver hair, the faint smell of lavender and lemon cleaner. I thought of the Sundays I'd spent there, of how she'd watch me draw while pretending not to notice how much of the family had already stopped coming around. Yes, I said, all of it, every single one. Understood. Morrison closed the folder. We'll take it from here. The next hour blurred. Papers signed, statements confirmed, officers escorting them out in pairs. My mother tried once more to reach for me, but I stepped back. You chose your side, I said. Now live with it. When the door finally shut behind the last of them, the room was unrecognizably still. Just Caldwell, me, and the ghost of my grandmother's intent. He cleared his throat softly. There's something else, he said, sliding a smaller folder toward me. Your grandmother asked me to give you this once the letters were read. It contains her contact notes for your father, address, phone number, copies of the identification documents he used under his alias. My heartbeat felt too big for my chest. My voice faltered. You're sure this is real? Caldwell nodded. She met him herself, twice, according to her diary entries. I touched the folder like it might vanish if I wasn't gentle enough. Inside, on the top page, was a name I hadn't spoken aloud since I was 9, Daniel Vallon. Below it, a phone number. For a long time, I just stared at it, too afraid to believe it meant what it meant. Caldwell spoke softly. Take your time. The estate is yours regardless, but she wanted you to have something greater than money. I stood, the chair's legs scraping the floor. She already gave me that, I said. She gave me the truth. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes of documents and silence. The city outside glowed in streaks of orange and white, but none of it felt real. I had a fortune waiting for me, a family falling apart, and one line of digits that might lead back to the man I thought I'd lost forever. I picked up my phone. The number trembled under my thumb before I pressed it. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, hello? The voice was older, rougher, but underneath it, the same warmth I remembered from bedtime stories and morning pancakes. Dad, I whispered. A pause, a sharp inhale, then a sound, half sob, half disbelief. Sweetheart? My throat closed. Grandma's will was today, I managed. She told me everything. He was quiet for a long moment. I heard him exhale shakily. I wanted to come back so many times, he said, his voice breaking. But Gregory, he said he'd destroy you. He said he'd make sure you went to prison if I ever showed my face. I know, I said, tears streaming freely now. She told me. You don't have to hide anymore. He let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. You sound just like your mother, before all of this broke her. I'm not her, I said softly. Not anymore. Can I see you? He asked. I've missed 20 birthdays, 20 Christmases. I can't miss another day. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, eyes squeezed shut. Please, come home. The next afternoon, I stood at the arrivals gate at the airport, a bundle of nerves that felt too fragile to hold. Travelers spilled through the doors in waves. Families, couples, strangers who all looked too much like the world I'd been excluded from. Then I saw him. Older, grayer, more lines around his eyes, but the same smile. The one I'd remembered every time life had felt too heavy to bear. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. He opened his arms, and I stepped into them like no time had passed at all. I'm so sorry, he whispered into my hair, for everything. You were protecting me, I said. I understand now. We stood there for a long moment, and for the first time since Grandma's office, I felt like breathing didn't hurt. Outside, the air smelled like rain. The storm had finally broken, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't standing in the ruins of my family. I was standing at the beginning of something new. It took less than a month for the entire story to break across every news outlet in the state. The Valinwell reading scandal, the headline screamed. The story was too cinematic to resist. A wealthy matriarch exposes her family's corruption from beyond the grave. Every network wanted an interview. Every cousin wanted silence money. And I wanted none of it. What I wanted was order. Grandma had left the chaos, but she'd also left a roadmap. Every account, every password, every name of the lawyers she trusted. I met with them, one by one. Some looked surprised that a 24-year-old could sound decisive. Others looked relieved that someone finally was. Sell the beach house, I said, staring at the file that listed its stained history. That's worth over $2 million, one advisor stammered. I know, I replied. That's what makes it perfect for restitution. I sold it. Every inch of that stolen view went to fund a legal aid program for victims of financial fraud. The irony was too sharp not to use. The trials began 6 months later. I went to everyone. Gregory's lawyer opened with his usual venom. My client is a victim of manipulation, of a senile woman's paranoia, and of his niece's ambition. He gestured toward me. She's weaponizing grief for profit. My lawyer didn't even flinch. We'll let the evidence speak. It did. Emails, bank transfers, the audio Grandma had recorded of Gregory bragging over Brandy about driving his brother out of business. By day 3, his own wife refused to look at him. By day 5, his lawyer asked for a recess to negotiate a plea. He didn't get one. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and found him guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation. 12 years. When the judge read the sentence, Gregory turned to me one last time and said, "You destroyed this family." I met his eyes. No, Grandma did. I'm just finishing what she started. They led him out in cuffs, and I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. Vivian filed for divorce the next week, but not before selling every luxury she'd ever flaunted and donating half to the charity Grandma had exposed Helen for stealing from. It didn't erase the affair, but it was something. Helen pled guilty. Embezzlement, fraud, restitution. The Pediatric Foundation launched a full audit and begged me to sit on their new oversight board. I agreed, on one condition, that no family member of mine ever be allowed near the accounts again. Diana tried to run. They found her 3 states away, living off what remained of her parents' retirement fund. She confessed the moment they showed her the ledgers Grandma had notarized herself. She took a deal: 3 years probation, full repayment, and mandatory financial ethics classes. Trevor, the blackmailer, got 6 years. His victims started coming forward once they learned Grandma's evidence protected them from retaliation. One sent me a handwritten note that said, "Tell your grandmother she saved my marriage." I couldn't, but I kept the note. Brandon, my youngest cousin, cooperated. He gave up his suppliers, pled down to probation, and entered rehab. He sends me updates now, proof of clean tests, notes about the college classes he's retaking. He signs every one, trying to earn it back. Denise, the caretaker, didn't even make bail. Attempted murder isn't something you apologize your way out of. My mother avoided prison. Her lawyer argued fear, duress, years of psychological abuse from her brother. It worked, barely. She agreed to testify against Gregory and pay restitution for every hush check she'd accepted. She called me once after sentencing. "I know you'll never forgive me," she said, "but I need you to understand. I thought if I kept him happy, he'd leave you alone." "You could have told me the truth," I said, "any time in the last 15 years. Her voice cracked. "Would you have believed me?" "I guess we'll never know." That was the last time we spoke. The estate took months to settle. $3.7 million, not counting property or investments. Money felt strange after everything it had done to us. It didn't look like security anymore. It looked like responsibility. So I divided it the way Grandma would have. The first trust I set up was for my father. After 15 years of exile, he had nothing. I told him it wasn't charity, it was justice. He cried when he saw the paperwork. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You lost everything because of him." "I didn't lose everything," I said. "I found you." The second trust was for Helen's charity, the real one now, under new management. I gave them $500,000 and new accountants. I made sure the donations actually went to the children this time. When the new director tried to thank me publicly, I refused. "Don't put my name on anything," I said. "Just do the work." The third trust was for me, not for luxury, but for purpose. I quit my teaching job, enrolled in a master's program for social work and nonprofit law. If greed had destroyed my family, maybe compassion could rebuild something new. A year later, my father moved back to town. He bought a small house near the Old Oak Park and started fixing it up. We have dinner every Sunday. Nothing fancy. He still cooks too much pasta. I still bring dessert. Sometimes we talk about Grandma, how ruthless she was, how brilliant. "You know," he said once, "your grandmother didn't just expose them. She saved us both." "I think she knew exactly what she was doing," I replied. He smiled. "She always did." The others scattered. Diana moved across the country to start fresh. Trevor still writes from prison. Letters full of apologies I haven't decided whether to believe. Brandon sends pictures from his rehab graduation. Helen lost her house paying legal fees but found a smaller one near the coast. She volunteers now, quietly, humbly. My mother sends cards on birthdays and Christmas. I keep them unopened in a drawer. Maybe someday I'll be ready to read them, but not yet. Last spring, I visited Grandma's grave for the first time since the will reading. The cemetery was quiet, the air sweet with rain. I brought lilies, her favorite, and sat beside the headstone. "You could have just given me the money," I said. "You didn't have to burn down the whole family to do it." But as soon as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. She hadn't burned anything. She just revealed that it was already ashes. Someone had added an inscription at the base of her stone, carved recently. "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you furious." I laughed through tears. Even from the grave, Grandma had the last word. When I stood to leave, my father was waiting by the car. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, looking back at the headstone. "I think I finally am." As we drove away, the city stretched wide and gold in the distance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was escaping anything. I was just moving forward. 3 years later, people still whispered the story like a family ghost. The girl who inherited millions by destroying her relatives. They said it at fundraisers, at cafes, at every gala that had once been Grandma's playground. Some called me ruthless. Some called me brave. Most called me lucky. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt purposeful. Because what Grandma left me wasn't just money. It was a blueprint for truth. Today, I run a nonprofit called the Valen Initiative, a name I fought the board to keep. It started as a small legal aid fund for victims of financial fraud. Now it's a network of lawyers, social workers, and forensic accountants who specialize in uncovering deceit. We've helped over 200 families, widows defrauded by partners, siblings conned out of inheritances, caretakers exploited by employers. Each case feels personal because in some way it is. Sometimes I still find myself using Grandma's voice in meetings. Her calm ruthlessness, her precision. The first time I caught myself doing it, I froze. Then I smiled. Maybe that was her real inheritance. A few weeks ago, a woman came to my office, hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the intake form. "My brother stole everything," she said. He forged my signature, took the house, drained the insurance. I don't know what to do. He has lawyers, money, connections. I have nothing. I handed her a tissue and said what Grandma once wrote to me. That's not true. You have the truth. She looked up, eyes red and uncertain. You really think that's enough? I thought of Grandma's study, the meticulous notes, the recordings, the evidence she'd spent her final years gathering. I thought of how her truth had changed everything, not just for me, but for generations to come. Yes, I said, I know it is. After she left, I sat at my desk and looked at the framed photo beside my computer. It was from my father's wedding last year. A small ceremony in a bookstore, warm light spilling through glass shelves. He'd remarried a kind woman named Lydia, who owned the shop and had loved him long before she knew his last name. In the photo, I'm standing between them, my hand in his, smiling in a way that used to feel impossible. Every Sunday, I still visit their house for dinner. We talk about ordinary things now, recipes, renovations, a new puppy that can't stop chewing table legs. Sometimes he'll bring up Grandma, and there's no anger anymore, just reverence. She really was unstoppable, he says. Yeah, I tell him. She built a legacy out of justice. And every time he adds softly, you're doing the same. Not everything healed. Some wounds never do. They just learn to coexist with peace. My mother writes occasionally. The letters arrive in careful, even handwriting. The last one said, I hope someday you'll understand I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to survive. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood survival doesn't excuse silence. Some truths are too expensive to buy back with apologies. Still, I keep the letters, unopened, tied with a ribbon. Maybe one day I'll read them when I'm ready to forgive the woman who taught me how easy it is to mistake fear for loyalty. People ask if I regret pressing charges. They expect guilt, but all I feel is clarity. Justice isn't revenge. Revenge ends things. Justice repairs them. The family I have now isn't built on blood. It's built on truth, loyalty, and choice. My father, Lydia. A few friends who saw me through the worst nights. And, in some strange way, Grandma, still guiding me through every decision, every moral fork in the road. Last week, I drove back to the cemetery. The lilies had started blooming again around her grave. The carved line on her stone had weathered a little, the words fading into the marble. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you furious. I traced the letters with my fingers. You were right, I whispered. It did both. The wind moved through the trees, scattering petals across the grass. It almost felt like a response. Before I left, I told her about the nonprofit, about the families we'd helped, about the woman with shaking hands. I told her about Dad's wedding and about the new puppy that won't stop stealing shoes. I told her about peace, how strange and quiet it feels when it finally arrives. And then I said, thank you for making me angry enough to change everything. Because that was her real gift. Not the money, not the mansion, not the trusts or titles. It was the courage to stand in a room full of liars and choose truth anyway. As I turned to leave, sunlight broke through the clouds, catching the edges of the headstone. For a moment, the marble gleamed like fire. And I thought, if Grandma were here, she'd be smirking, saying, I told you, darling, burn it all down if you must. Just build something honest from the ashes. I smiled, whispered goodbye, and walked toward my car. The air was crisp, alive with the promise of another new beginning. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor of someone else's story. I felt like the author of my own.